Hello everyone, welcome to Winthrop in the World. I'm Paul Baskin, and with us today is Ryan Coholan. Ryan is the Chief of Operations at the MBTA, and we're so glad you came over here to Winthrop today to talk with us, because there's certainly a lot of things in Winthrop of which the MBTA is a very important part of our lives. We have the ferry, of course, we have bus service, we have the Blue Line that comes to Orient Heights, and we'd really like to hear from you in terms of what's going on with all kinds of things. I guess one thing I have to say that the MBTA has a pretty positive image these days, maybe due to Phil Lang. What's it like working there with a rock star like that and being part of that team?
Well, Paul, first off, thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here in Winthrop. And yeah, I mean, look, if you had Googled or been part of MBTA 2 years ago, it was definitely a different story. Yeah. But I think this point in the MBTA's book, we've done a lot of hard work. We've done a lot of work that I think a lot of people thought that we couldn't do, or we were incapable of doing. And I think once you get, like the saying goes, you get a lot of like-minded people in the same room with the same goals, the same desired outcomes, you can accomplish that. And while we acknowledge that we have a lot of work to do, quite frankly, what's harder? Is it harder to fix a problem, or is it more challenging to sustain the fix, right? And keep it up here. But this team has a high set of standards, and we believe that the improvements that we've brought about to the MBTA and all the services we provide, that's the starting point. We only want to go up from there.
Right. So one thing, since you're talking about that one of the concerns these days, of course, is the bus service. And it sounds like, at least in some people's minds, and I think maybe even what we're seeing, is that service has been decreased in Winthrop. Is that just a seasonal thing, or is there a sort of a permanent or more permanent decision? And I know we're talking about also revamping the bus lines to go away from the Point, Shirley Point, and up to Revere. Can you sort of give a sense as to what's going on with the bus service in Winthrop? Is it changing in particular ways, and how and why?
So I think there's a perception that bus service has decreased, and actually the schedule we rolled out this past summer, we actually increased the amount of service hours. Okay. And historically, bus service in Winthrop, the 712, 713 routes, the service was fairly inconsistent. And by that, I mean, it wasn't so much as every other bus. You'd have a 712, then a 713, then a 712, and a 713. You could have 5 712s, followed by a 713, and it really wasn't consistent. And that, when you talk about public transportation and delivering a service, people expect safe service, they expect reliable service, and consistent service. And public transportation may not always be the fastest way, so we have to be consistent. And when we say we're going to show up, we have to show up. So the service window in Winthrop actually increased. I believe we went from around 52 hours up to around 58 hours.
You're measuring hours of times the bus is actually in motion in town?
Hours of actual service delivery.
Yeah.
So number of buses, number of hours actually providing service.
Right.
So we actually saw an increase in the hours of service. But with that increase, we were able to align schedules so that it is consistent. Right. I think right now every 5th trip goes all the way to Shirley Point. Okay. And prior to that, it was a gamble. Right. You didn't really know what bus was going to show up next.
So a couple of things. One is I've noticed, like, I don't know, a month or two ago, the distance between bus service did expand. So it used to be, so the downtown area, you'd get it every, I don't know, 5 or 10, well, maybe a little more than that, but it stretched out at some points to like 20. So, but you're saying there has not been a reduction overall?
Correct. The actual service hours delivered, like I said, we've added service hours. And I want to focus on consistency. So now we schedule the bus service, 712, 713. There is a bus every 15-minute schedule. Okay. Previously, you may have buses show up 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, but then you could end up with a 20-minute gap. Okay. And so now, the benchmark is every 15 minutes. Right. And again, it's about consistency.
But less service to the Point, is that right?
So the service that we currently operate in Winthrop, that was based really on feedback. So in 2024, we had a survey that went out to folks who use our private carrier services, our contracted carrier services, like here in Winthrop. So when we get feedback from any survey, we incorporate that into the schedules. And really, A big challenge we have with bus service with the MBTA is for years, schedules were written and they were issued, and that was the operation. And the schedules never really evolved. And I think that it can be really detrimental when you leave a schedule on a shelf for 10, 20, 30 years.
Right.
Because think of it in that time frame. You have entire neighborhoods that they come, they go, workforces change, demographics change, service needs change.
Sure, but also people need, it's good to be able to rely on the fact that not have to, like, every time you're going to go somewhere, pull up the schedule and check, and not be like, well, last week I got on at 7:15, so do I have to check the schedule and make sure it's still going to be 7:15? So there's value in that consistency too, is there not?
Sure, and I think that what we do as far as MBTA transit schedule changes, so we adjust schedules every quarter, whether it's on bus or light rail, heavy rail. Commuter rail schedules, they adjust twice a year, and the ferry follows that quarterly approach. So typically those quarterly schedule changes, they're 1 minute here, 2 minutes here, 3 minutes here, a stop may move, the changes are relatively benign, right? When we do talk about larger changes, the removal of service, the addition of service, you know, typically we have upwards of 6 to 12 weeks of notice with that. But you know, I think that we've done a lot of work to make sure the public is equipped with the information they need to make their decision. You know, I always recommend, if it's been a while since you've ridden the MBTA, whether it's bus, ferry, light rail, heavy rail, commuter rail, go to the website, check the schedules online, use the MBTA Go app.
So what about the plan to run lines from Winthrop up into Revere and Beachmont, I believe? Is that coming, and when?
So right now, with the service pattern that we have, you know, we focus on intermodal connections between the Winthrop Ferry Terminal, Orient Heights Station, you know, essentially the routes that today's 712, 713 follow. And feedback already is tremendously positive from the folks who utilize those services. A great example of this last schedule change that we did. So for whatever reason, previous schedules, you would be on the first bus and it would get to Orient Heights after Blue Line service had already begun in the morning. So today, if you get on the first bus to Orient Heights, you arrive prior to the arrival of the first Blue Line train for service into Boston.
But I'm asking about the Revere extension. Is that happening, and when?
I mean, I want to say with public transportation, you really can't exclude any possibilities. But right now, there's no immediate plans.
Because we were led to believe that was coming, that was sort of a definite thing coming. You're suggesting that was maybe more of a notional thing in terms of the Revere, like a line going from Winthrop up into Revere. That's not coming, at least anytime soon, it sounds like then.
Correct. I think we have to focus on what we have here today before we look at any additional expansions.
What about bus shelters? There's a big discussion in town. People are, you know, right now the weather's great, but I mean, it's going to be cold again soon. In the summer, it's hot. I mean, is there any motion toward having a substantial construction of bus shelters in the town of Winthrop? So
bus shelters are a unique topic because typically the MBTA, we don't own the roadway, we don't own the sidewalk, we don't own the property. You know, so when we talk about bus shelters in communities, we really look to the community to partner with us on the best way to accomplish that. You know, I think there's a lot of room to talk about communal ownership of whether it's a train station, a bus shelter. You know, and I think there's a real opportunity to partner with communities when it comes to bus shelters.
So you're saying in so many words the town has to pony up some money to make this happen?
It's not even about money. I think from where I sit, if Winthrop wanted to sit down and have a conversation about where it makes the most sense for the installation of a bus shelter, you know, I might be willing to provide a bus shelter.
I see. So that's not an ongoing conversation. Then it sounds like the way you're describing it.
Well, no. So Winthrop leadership, I believe it was middle of August. You know, we did have a conversation, and I think there's more conversations to be had. You know, but the idea that the MBTA is just going to come in and put a piece of infrastructure on someone else's property, that doesn't make a lot of sense because, you know, bus shelters and quite frankly, any new construction, new infrastructure, when something is new, it's great, but it requires maintenance, it requires upkeep. And that's where I really would love to continue the discussions about who maintains that bus
And,
shelter.
and what's sort of the norm in other cities and towns? Is that they just don't have bus shelters in most cities and towns, and Winthrop's sort of normal like that, or are most cities and towns somehow figure that out to a...
No, it's not uncommon to go to any bus stop in the MBTA service area and find that there's no bus shelter.
I see. Okay, so that's more in the realm of the norm. I see. Certainly more to talk about buses, but the ferries. I mean, obviously, I think people in town are grateful that the MBTA reworked the ferry schedule so that we don't have to go all the way out to Quincy every ride. I guess it's just now on weekends, one direction that you have to do that. But generally, that's been eliminated, and that's very nice. Can you say whether you're seeing any results from that in terms of ridership pickup or anything else that's worth noting?
I think the work that we've done as far as ferry transportation, Winthrop, East Boston, Lynn, I mean, I could sit here now today and spend 10 minutes talking about the routes, whereas 5 years ago that wasn't the case.
Right.
We've seen so much ridership satisfaction. I think satisfaction is a great way to put it, plus some ridership growth with the expansion of water services that we provide. I think the future is bright as far as water transportation in and around Boston.
Right.
We're relying on, number one, to provide good water service. You need boats.
Right.
Obviously. And we just recently, it was well publicized. We have the Harbor Gem now to serve Winthrop.
Okay.
It has a sister ship, the Abigail Adams, which services Quincy. So any opportunity we get to expand that fleet,
Right.
that means that we can provide more service.
Right, but do you have any kind of read on ridership, whether that's gotten any better or changed in any way as a result of not having Quincy in the mix?
No, I think ridership direct to Winthrop between downtown Boston and Winthrop. Yeah, I think that when you can provide a service that answers a specific demand,
Right.
but still give that intermodal connection or that opportunity to connect to other services like we do today
Right.
at Central Wharf. I think that.
Okay. What about the stop at Logan? I think what we've been noticing is when you ride the ferry from Winthrop to Boston, it stops at Logan, and very often it stops at Logan. Nobody gets on or off. It seems like there's just not a lot of people using the service at Logan. When I've flown in Logan, I've never even seen a sign that tells me that there's a ferry option. I guess I'm wondering, is the MBTA serious about making the Logan stop a real viable option that could then contribute some revenue into the cost of the ferry ride here? Because right now it feels like maybe people in Winthrop are getting sort of the worst of both worlds in the sense that they have to stop at Logan, but there's no revenue coming from it, or it feels that way. Can you sort of say what's going on with that?
Yeah, I think, public transportation has to be designed to meet needs maybe that you don't expect to see on every trip.
Yeah.
We don't measure success by saying every seat has a person in it on every trip.
Right.
Because that's not what public transportation is about. Public transportation is about affording options and, again, reliable, safe, consistent transportation. And while you may be on a trip that doesn't see anyone get on or off at Logan, people do utilize that connection to Logan.
Okay.
Logan Airport, we've all had to drive there. That's a challenge all to its own.
Well, here we don't have to do that as much, but yes.
That's true.
Yeah.
Obviously that ferry connection to Logan is vital, as is the Blue Line connection, as is the Silver Line connection. And remember, too, the other water transportation services, Hingham, Hull, they have that connection to Logan, which is very popular.
But what I'm asking is does the MBTA feel like it's taking full advantage of that stop at Logan? Because again, not just from my perspective of riding the Winthrop ferry, I don't see at Logan any indication to a traveler that, oh, here's the ferry as an option to get into Boston. Is that something that the MBTA sees as well and is working on, or is the MBTA fairly happy with the status quo of the Logan station?
No, I think that there's always opportunity to improve awareness as the ferry being a viable connection to and from Logan Airport. We do work very well with Massport to advertise those services, but do I think that it's an important connection? I do.
Right. A big issue in Winthrop is the 3A housing bill. I just want to know, is there anything in which the restrictions from 3A affect the ability to have funding cooperation with the MBTA? We mentioned the bus shelters, or any other ways in which that is potentially an obstacle to what goes on between Winthrop and the MBTA?
Well, I think the Haley Driscoll administration has made it very clear that they're serious about funding the transportation needs of the MBTA.
Right.
You know, for MBTA communities that we serve, and regardless of what mode it is, you know, we're lucky that the administration has shown their unwavering support. And also, you know, we've been able to demonstrate that if you do give us $1, we're going to give you back $1, if not more, in service, sort of bang for the buck.
Right.
You know, so do I think it's directly related to any 3A type housing? No, I think that public transportation, if you can demonstrate that you can deliver the service, that you can maintain the service,
Right.
the funding will come.
But what I'm asking is, there are no 3A related restrictions on funding from the MBTA as far as you know of?
Not that I'm aware of.
I see. Okay, no, thank you. The one thing, though, going into the area you're talking about, which is on the housing issue itself, there's a lot of discussion in town about how much we want to build up the central business district in Winthrop, how many big apartment buildings to allow there, and one of the common concerns is car congestion. So I guess where the MBTA comes in on that is the MBTA in a position to sort of say, if the town puts X number of new units in downtown Winthrop, for instance, it will, the MBTA has the capability to respond with an appropriate increase in service, transit service for non-car options in and out of town?
So that's a great question. So in my time with the MBTA, prior to being chief operating officer, I was the chief railroad officer.
Okay.
So I oversaw the commuter rail and all of those related operations. In Mansfield, this is when transit-oriented development sort of became the next big thing. Mm-hmm. And we watched a lot of TOD developments along the Providence-Stoughton line. And then one day it opened. And the next day there were hundreds of people
Right.
that we weren't ready to accommodate.
Right.
What we've learned is that you know, early discussions, early involvement by the MBTA allows us to prepare to deliver those services. And while we aren't directly tied to construction or development of these parcels, you know, whether it's commercial or residential, we definitely play a role.
Right.
And we can play a role in the success of all these projects because everyone, to your point, you know, needs to get there.
Right.
They need to get there, they need to get in, they need to get out. So if we're involved in those discussions early,
Right.
And often, we can set up a successful transportation plan.
I see.
Particularly in Winthrop, with so much opportunity, whether it's water or the Blue Line, which runs incredible,
Right.
Additional bus services, all of that's possible.
Right.
If the MBTA is part of those discussions, because it takes us a while to respond.
Right.
You know, whether it's by bus or by water or even by rail.
Right.
You know, the fleets that we have, the capacity we have,
Right.
it's programmed in, and it does take time to make big adjustments like that.
So is there a contact person for the people, for either people in Winthrop or for that matter the government of Winthrop? Is it you, or is there, or so who does someone just pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm wondering about this involving the MBTA, or write to? What's the best way?
I mean, we have a tremendous legislative affairs team that can work directly with the community. Depending on what the question is or what the inquiry looks like, they know how to field internal to the MBTA so that we can give you the very best information.
Okay.
And that may actually mean that myself or someone from my team might want to come out and listen in on a project, listen in on the progress, and start to talk about ideas of how do we transport people to and from.
So a couple examples. One is that, again, in the central business district, there's the town council here in town is talking about actually expanding the requirements for parking. So it sounds like the town council here is moving in a direction of actually going in the opposite direction, which is to require housing to have more car spaces. Is that something that the MBTA could get involved with and say, well, you know what, actually maybe you don't need to, and this is how we could sort of work with that? Is that a kind of conversation you can imagine
I'd love
having?
to be part of those conversations.
Has that been happening? I mean, what's your level? What's your understanding of the level of communication between the town and the MBTA when these kinds of things arise?
Well, like I said, when a question gets fielded that has to or should come to operations, once that comes into the MBTA, typically through our legislative affairs group, you know, that's when those conversations happen. Some stuff can be answered without my involvement,
Right.
but you know what you just described, I'd love to know more about, and I can't guarantee that I can solve it,
Right.
and I might not be able to solve it immediately,
Right.
but you know, my mind is always working for how can we better provide service.
Right.
You know?
So there's a lot of people in town who think of like the good old days in town, and one of the good old days in town was it used to be in Winthrop a whole trolley service went around the town. I don't know if you've seen these maps, but they go back to like the 40s and 50s when there was a fairly robust service that went all around.
I keep a book on my desk that,
You have that book?
highlights all of that history.
Yeah, I was
yes.
going to bring it, though. It's called The Train on the Beach, I believe is the name of the book, but it talks about that. But is there any, I mean, you can see remnants of that around town. Is there any hope of reviving that?
I mean, right now, I think we need to use our money to focus on the system we have today.
Right.
You know, do I knock it off the list of anything possible in the future? Anything's possible.
Sure. And one key element of that, as you may know, is going from Orient Heights into Winthrop. There's that Saratoga Street is the road. And just north of Saratoga, there's an old disused train line that's talked now about making that into a pathway that could be used for pedestrians, bicyclists, and maybe emergency vehicles. Do you know anything about the status of that? And because it would have to somehow involve getting around the Orient Heights station or going under it or over it, around it or somehow, because there's obviously the rail yard there, the repair yard there. Is there anything you can say about the status of that and the hopes for that?
Well, I think typically the MBTA, I mean, we bank a lot of land, a lot of corridors that lend themselves well to multi-use paths, whether it's pedestrian, bicyclists.
Yeah.
You know, and we have a lot of success working with municipalities to provide that sort of connection.
Right.
You know, I think any opportunity to work through potential changes to our infrastructure to accommodate,
Right.
we're very willing to listen to.
What
But it can't come at a cost to the service either.
Yeah, no, I know, and again, it has to be worked out. I just was wondering.
Yeah.
So this feels like this has been an issue that's been talked about for years, and I'm just wondering if you have any sense as to how live a discussion that is, as far as you're concerned. At the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think ideas like this are always great. The
Yeah.
next stage of the idea is, you know, putting a pen to paper, come up with a rough design, but then attach a cost to it as well. Like I said, you know, our focus right now is building on what we have today.
Right.
As far as infrastructure, as far as service. You know, but long term, I think that interconnection of different ways to get around.
Right.
You know, what you just talked about answers that first mile, last mile connection. And I think that's very important to the
Right.
success of the bigger system.
So another way to answer the first mile, last mile question is to get rid of it entirely, and that could look in the form of maybe, we'll just look at Orient Heights, but there's stations throughout the MBTA system that are essentially stations with parking lots around them that seem like they could be ripe for putting housing there, like on top, like build the housing and then keep the parking underneath, have the station underneath, have it protected for the users, and make revenue and create housing right there that people can get in. Is there any thought of doing that, like system, either in Orient Heights or system-wide, with all the land that the MBTA has that could potentially be used for that?
Yeah, I mean, we have a dedicated transit-oriented development group within the MBTA.
Right.
You know, so any ideas like that, we typically look for ways to partner with anyone who is willing to sit with us and work with us. It's interesting though, because a lot of people, once they talk about we want to build a residential, you know, building next to the railroad, transit. You know, that can bring about its own set of challenges too.
Okay.
I used to always say with commuter rail, everybody wants it, but nobody wants it. And by that I mean no one wants the noise, the rumbling, the vibrations that come with that.
Right.
But I think if it's done right and if it's done thoughtful and it's done transparently,
Right.
you know, we can't make trains silent.
Right.
You know, we can do our part to mitigate, but
No, but there's other, like Washington D.C. I'm more familiar with, has that in spades. The whole system is built that way, and they put housing all on top of the stations, and it's not loud. It's just underneath, and you don't hear it so much. Is there any example of that even happening in the MBTA system, or is that even being thought about?
so it's definitely being thought about.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely being thought about.
Could it come to a place like Orient Heights?
Again, I mean, nothing's off the table.
Nothing's off the table, but it's
from where
not.
I sit, there's no such thing as a bad idea.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I'm just sort of wondering. In the news, among the things in the news these days is at South Station they're adding fare gates.
Yes.
And we're hearing that apparently that's not just going to be South Station, that there's apparently some thought of doing that a lot more widely in the T system, including on the ferries. Is there anything you can tell us about that and sort of what's being planned and why?
Sure. So Fairgates actually went into North Station almost 2 years ago.
Okay.
That was the first station, the first commuter rail station to receive that. Now, Fairgates are a common site at a lot of the heavy rail stations, light rail stations, but that was a new site as far as commuter rail goes. Not uncommon if you travel outside the United States. A lot of European systems, that's just the way that they were built.
Right.
But yeah, Fairgates, the construction at South Station has begun.
Right.
You know, we're also looking at Fairgates at Back Bay Station, Ruggles Station.
Right.
because ultimately every dollar into the system counts.
Right.
And
Is it coming to ferries too?
well, so ferries, they kind of lend themselves uniquely where there's typically one way on, one way off.
Right.
I think that fare media,
Yeah.
I think you can expect to see some changes with how that works, how you
Right.
purchase your fares.
Right.
You know, but the ferry already sets itself up well for fare verification and for people to pay their fares, because typically there's one way on and
Okay.
one way off.
Yeah. No, you sounds like you're sort of not saying yes to the gates, because I'm hearing otherwise from other places that there's plans to put gates at ferry entrances. You're not hearing that. Okay.
I am not.
Interesting.
No.
Okay. So that's worth knowing. How about a more unified payment system? And again, that gets into the question of, in the ferry in Winthrop is more than twice the rate of an average MBTA fare. So I kind of meant to ask earlier if that's something that could be addressed. But as part of that, I'm just wondering where are we seeing, what's the progress toward a unified system where I could have on my phone, like you do in other cities in the US, one app on my phone, and I can use it to get on the ferry, get it on the subway, get on the bus, get on everything. I mean, I know there's some unification, but not fully yet. Where are we getting, where's that at?
Sure. So when you look at modernizing something like a fare payment system on a system as old as the MBTA, you know, it's very tough to make a fail swoop change.
Okay.
You know, so where we're at right now, you know, today, you know, you can utilize a contactless payment at our subway stations. You can use it on board buses, on board the Green Line. Commuter rail today, you can now use a debit card on board, which is something you couldn't do even 5 years ago.
Right.
You know, so we continue to work on how we can best really set up public transportation so that it's easy to use.
Right.
I think, to your point, I think sort of a universal transportation, you know, fare media that would be accepted beyond the MBTA. I mean, I'm thinking about the regional transit authorities.
Sure.
Even. You know, we talked a little bit about that first mile, last mile.
There are some of that, I think, in Western Mass, maybe, or there's some places where that does exist, I think, but yes.
Yeah, wouldn't it be great to travel anywhere in the Commonwealth with one form of payment?
Right, that's my question for you.
Right.
I'm asking where are we at on that? Is that coming? Should we expect that in the next year or two, or?
I mean, I don't think we're a year or two within that, but I would tell you, as far as the MBTA with our fare media system, the improvements that we're making, the ease of making a fare payment now on the MBTA, you know, I think that we're heading that direction.
Yeah,
I don't think we're going to be a statewide uniformed